Some people never gossip. Some never talk behind your back. Have you noticed that? You can sit with them for hours, talk about work, relationships, family, even share frustrations, and somehow they never lean in and say, "Let me tell you what I heard." They don't dissect someone else's mistakes. They don't pass along secrets disguised as concern. They don't build closeness by tearing someone apart. And it can feel strange to those that gossip a lot, because gossip is normal. It's everywhere. It's how many people bond. So when someone doesn't participate in gossip, we often assume something about them. Maybe they're boring. Maybe they're guarded. Maybe they think they're better than everyone else. But what if it's none of those things? What if not gossiping isn't about moral superiority, but about emotional safety? Most people think gossip is simply about curiosity, or entertainment, or filling silence. But gossip is rarely about information. It's about regulation. When we talk about someone who isn't present, we are doing something subtle. We are managing our own feelings. Jealousy becomes commentary. Insecurity becomes critique. Confusion becomes speculation. Gossip turns emotion into a story, and stories feel safer than feelings. If I say, "She's so dramatic," I don't have to say, "I felt overwhelmed." If I say, "He's clearly insecure," I don't have to say, "I felt intimidated." Gossip gives us distance from our own discomfort. It converts inner turbulence into outer narrative. That's why it spreads so easily. It relieves tension. It creates a temporary connection, a shared perspective, an unspoken alliance. It says, "We are on the same side." And for many people, that sense of alliance feels like belonging. But here's the quiet difference with people who don't gossip. They don't use others to regulate themselves, not because they never feel jealousy, not because they are immune to irritation, but because they learn to sit with those feelings without outsourcing them. They experience the same human reactions, they just don't convert them into currency. And that usually starts early. Some people grew up in homes where words were weapons, where stories about others were never neutral, where trust was fragile. They learned that once you participate in tearing someone down, you're also silently permitting someone to tear you down later. Because gossip is rarely a one-way street. If someone shares secrets with you easily, they share yours just as easily. And emotionally aware people feel that. They sense the instability in conversations that revolve around absent people. It doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel safe. There's a subtle anxiety in it, like building a connection on sand. So instead, they choose something slower. They bond over ideas, experiences, shared growth. It may not feel as electrifying, but it feels solid. There's another layer too. People who don't gossip often have strong internal boundaries. Not loud boundaries, not aggressive ones, but clear ones. They understand that every conversation shapes identity. Every word spoken reinforces a pattern. If I repeatedly focus on others' flaws, my mind becomes trained to scan for flaws. If I repeatedly assume hidden motives, my perception starts expecting betrayal. Gossip doesn't just describe the world, it programs the lens through which we see it. And some people are very protective of their lens. They know how easy it is for cynicism to feel intelligent, for criticism to feel insightful, for sarcasm to feel sharp. But over time, that sharpness cuts inward too. You can't constantly analyze others without slowly analyzing yourself the same way. So people who don't gossip often choose restraint not out of politeness, but out of self-preservation. They guard their internal climate. There's also something deeper. Gossip thrives in comparison. It thrives on hierarchy. Who's doing better? Who's failing? Who's attractive? Who's awkward? Who's winning? Who's losing? Comparison gives the ego orientation. It answers the quiet question, where do I stand? But people who are grounded in their identity don't need constant positioning. They don't need someone else's downfall to feel steady. They don't need private information to feel included. Their sense of worth isn't built in contrast, it's built internally. And when identity is internal, gossip loses its appeal, because there's nothing to gain from it. Another misconception is that people who avoid gossip are emotionally distant, but often the opposite is true. They are deeply empathetic, and empathy changes the experience of gossip. When someone starts criticizing an absent person, empathetic individuals don't just hear the critique, they imagine the person being described. They feel the weight of those words landing somewhere. They instinctively ask, "Would I say this if they were here?" If the answer is no, something inside them tightens, because empathy makes absence feel less distant. It makes the invisible present. And once you feel that presence, participating becomes harder. Not impossible, just uncomfortable. There's also emotional maturity involved. Mature individuals understand something subtle. When someone behaves poorly, there is always context. Stress, fear, unmet needs, old wounds. That doesn't excuse behavior, but it complicates it. Gossip simplifies people. It reduces them to a moment, a flaw, a rumor. But emotionally mature minds resist simplification. They hold complexity. They think, "I don't know the full story," and that humility interrupts the urge to spread half stories. Sometimes, not gossiping is about self-trust. If I need to talk about someone behind their back, it often means I don't feel capable of addressing something directly. Maybe I'm afraid of conflict. Maybe I doubt my communication skills. Maybe I fear rejection. So instead of confronting, I vent sideways. People who rarely gossip often have practiced directness, not harshness, not aggression, but clean communication. If something bothers them, they address it, or they release it. They don't let it ferment into commentary. And that skill changes everything. Because when you can speak honestly to someone's face, you don't need to speak about them behind it. There's also a connection to emotional regulation. Gossip can be a form of emotional discharge. It's easier to criticize someone else than to admit, "I felt hurt." It's easier to question someone's motives than to say, "I felt excluded." So when people don't gossip, it often means they're comfortable naming their real emotions. They can say, "That interaction bothered me," without turning the other person into a villain. They can hold discomfort without spreading it. And that requires inner stability. It requires the ability to feel something without immediately acting on it, without turning it into a narrative, without recruiting allies. There's something else that's rarely discussed. People who don't gossip often understand projection. They know that what irritates us in others often mirrors something unresolved within ourselves. So when they feel the urge to criticize, they pause. They ask, "Why did that affect me?" Sometimes the answer is simple. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But that pause creates growth. Gossip bypasses that pause. It externalizes discomfort instead of exploring it. And growth-oriented individuals don't want to bypass. They want to understand. There's also trust. When someone doesn't gossip, others slowly begin to feel safe around them. They notice that their secrets don't travel, that their vulnerabilities aren't repackaged into entertainment. And over time, something powerful happens. Conversations deepen because people relax. They sense that this is someone who won't use their openness as social leverage. Trust is built in silence as much as in speech. And those who don't gossip often build quiet reputations, not flashy ones, but stable ones. Now, this doesn't mean they never discuss behavior. They do. They just do it differently. If someone is harmful, they acknowledge it. If something needs addressing, they address it. But the intention isn't to bond over judgment. It's to seek clarity. There's a difference between processing and gossiping. Processing seeks understanding. Gossip seeks alignment. Processing can include compassion. Gossip often excludes it. People who never gossip tend to value integrity over inclusion, and that can be lonely, because sometimes the quickest way into a group is through shared criticism. Declining to participate can create distance. Silence can feel awkward.
You may be seen as disengaged, or overly serious, or mysterious. But for them, internal coherence matters more than external comfort. They would rather sit with a little social discomfort than betray their own values. And here's something deeper. When you habitually speak well of others, even in their absence, you train your brain to look for nuance, for effort, for humanity. You build a perception rooted in understanding instead of suspicion. Over time, that perception shapes your emotional world, because the way you talk about people becomes the way you experience people. If you constantly assume manipulation, you'll feel surrounded by threat. If you constantly assume complexity, you'll feel surrounded by humans. And that shift changes your nervous system. It lowers defensiveness. It increases steadiness. Not gossiping is rarely about moral perfection. It's about alignment. Alignment between what you believe and what you speak, between who you are and how you bond. Some people reach a point where they realize something quietly powerful. Every time I speak about someone who isn't here, I am shaping the kind of person I become. Not in a dramatic way, in small, almost invisible ways. Habits of speech become habits of thought. Habits of thought become habits of perception. Habits of perception become identity. And identity determines the quality of our relationships. So they choose carefully, not rigidly, not self-righteously, just intentionally. They understand that not every thought deserves expression. Not every irritation deserves amplification. Not every rumor deserves oxygen. Sometimes restraint is a form of self-respect, and sometimes silence is kindness. There's a final layer to this. People who don't gossip often don't need to control how others are perceived. They trust that truth unfolds over time. They trust that patterns reveal themselves. They don't feel responsible for managing reputations through whispers, because they are secure enough to let reality speak. And that security is quiet. It doesn't announce itself.
It simply chooses differently. So if you are someone who never gossips or rarely feels the urge to, it may not be because you're detached. It may not be because you're indifferent. It may be because somewhere inside you value emotional safety more than social currency. You value directness over drama. You value coherence over clout. And if you've ever felt slightly out of place because of that, perhaps that discomfort is simply the cost of integrity. Not loud integrity, not performative goodness, just the simple decision to not build a connection at someone else's expense. Because in the end, the way we speak about people who aren't present quietly reveals how we feel about ourselves when we're alone. And maybe the people who never gossip have learned something subtle. Peace isn't only about avoiding conflict. It's about refusing to carry unnecessary noise inside your own mind. And when you protect your inner space like that, you don't just change your conversations, you change the atmosphere of every room you enter, even when you say very little. And that silence says more than most words ever could.